When we do these recap shows, I feel like a lot of the time we're focusing on the downsides, injuries, bad rule changes, and stuff like that. So it's a really refreshing week. We can actually focus on some positives, being Kyren Williams back with the Los Angeles Rams holding a very good role for DFS. We're going to break down Williams' outlook going forward, talk about the rest of that team, and get you ready for other key takeaways across week 12 and take a look ahead to week number 13 in the salaries over on FanDuel.com. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, here to break down key takeaways from week number 12 in NFL DFS and take a look forward to the week 13 main slate and outline some guys who may be a bit undersalaried for next week. We'll dive into all that, beginning with Kyren Williams here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts, not just the Heat Check with the NFL show, but also Heat Check with UFC is there via Austin Swaim. And we have the Daily ISO with Tom Vecchio back every weekday. That'll be both here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and over on FanDuel TV Plus. So to get FanDuel TV Plus, go to FanDuel.com/watch and log in with your FanDuel account to watch Up and Adams, Run It Back. You can watch Covering the Spread, Heat Check, some Ringer shows as well, all in the same place. So FanDuel.com/watch or download the FanDuel TV Plus app on Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or Roku devices. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only. $5 pregame money line wager required, $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777. Or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia. 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's begin things here today with our headliner for week number 12, and it has to be Kyren Williams back with the Los Angeles Rams in a massive, massive role, and really no nits to pick with this one. He did lose some work to Royce Freeman, but Williams finished this game with 6 targets on top of 16 carries for 204 total yards in this game. He handled 7 out of 15 red zone chances. That's not really a role you can beat unless you're basically Christian McCaffrey. Now, they may eventually try to scale things back because Williams doesn't have the hugest frame. They've talked about scaling it back and stuff like that, but they're in the playoff hunt. So I think they need him, and he's clearly their best option. Now, next week, the Rams get Cleveland. And obviously, we don't want to go have players facing Cleveland all that often, but I feel like we can make an exception for Kyren Williams. Let's pull up the salaries over at FanDuel.com. For week number 13, it is a massive red zone share for a guy who gets both carries and targets, potential Myles Garrett injury here as well. So I would say an appropriate salary for Kyren Williams would probably be $8,700, and his salary next week is $8,500. So honestly, that's not that bad. And I think he's well worth that, given the pass catching, given the red zone role. Very tough matchup. We don't want to go here often, but for a guy with Kyren Williams' role, I am very okay with that. So Kyren Williams, welcome back, and thank you for having a fantastic role once again. Elsewhere, there were some injuries. Honestly, not that much for this week. As far as the injuries go, the big ones were primarily on the New Orleans Saints. They were already without Michael Thomas, and then they lost Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed during the game this week. Olave ruled out with a concussion. Shaheed suffered a thigh injury in the first half and did not return, and it led to a lot of stats for A.T. Perry and Lynn Bowden. Bowden is a really fun player, but probably not someone we're going to get to in DFS because the ceiling is not super high there. And Perry has earned just 6 targets while running a lot of routes the past 2 weeks. More than anything, I think this would just kind of push more work to Alvin Kamara, Juwan Johnson, and Taysom Hill. Johnson had 7 targets in this game. Kamara had 5. And this also does downgrade the offensive efficiency in general, especially if Olave does want to visit, which he most likely would. Derek Carr wasn't really in play for DFS to begin with, but he's fully out of play now with this game or with these injuries. Kamara gets a boost to his floor, but it does hurt his odds of blowing up. Like, it's harder to have a 30-point game when you're on a team that might struggle with the football, which they kind of already were. And maybe A.T. Perry could be a value wide receiver, but I need the salary to be super low. Now, they are facing Detroit next week, so that's a spot we may want to be on from a DFS perspective. Let's just at least take a look at the salaries here on these guys. Kamara, I would probably want to be down to like 84 or so, given the offense. He's at 83, so they're actually kind of making that one somewhat of a decision. So kudos to them for that. Juwan Johnson, again, 7 targets this week. Pretty good player who's got some burst. I would probably want that around $4,800 a tight end, and he is 49. So, okay, again, appropriate. And A.T. Perry, I need in kind of like the true dart throw range, even if there's no Olave and no Shaheed. So probably looking closer to like 52 for him. And his salary is 57. So I bumped him up quite a bit. So not terrible on Kamara, not terrible on Juwan Johnson, but overall, I think it just kind of downgrades that team, makes that game a bit less fun against Detroit. So it's not a great situation overall for them. Kind of a bummer to see that happen for New Orleans. Quentin Johnston left early in last night's game for the Chargers and did not return. It didn't really matter because Keenan Allen had a 14-target game for the 3rd consecutive game. Jalen Guyton ranked 3rd in the team in targets with 5. Austin Eckler had 6. Guyton did have 2 deep targets, but we kind of know what he is. I guess, like, I feel like I always put him in this box of being a no upside kind of guy, but like, he does get deep targets, does get red zone targets from a quarterback who is very skilled. Allen and Eckler basically are the guys here. Losing Johnston would boost the volume expectations for those 2 guys. But again, similar to Kamara, would hurt the offensive efficiency as a whole if they don't have another key offensive player, at least until Josh Palmer is back. Now, I'd be into Palmer if he returned, but I have not seen anything saying he'll be back this week because he's eligible to come off IR now. I haven't seen anything saying he'll be back this week. If he is, cool, I'll be there. But I think it's the same thing with Eckler and Allen as we had with Kamara, where it does boost their floor because the volume is good, but probably going to be muted overall just because like they're not going to be in a lot of shootouts. Next week facing New England, probably Bailey Zappi there. You know, their implied total is fine at 23.5, but it's just, I don't know. It's not the highest upside team right now. Final injury note was in the Browns. They lost both Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Amari Cooper to injuries against the Broncos. It was a concussion for DTR and a rib injury for Cooper. PJ Walker took over at quarterback and was really rough. Honestly, much worse than DTR was. For the full season, DTR's efficiency stats are better than Walker's, and both of those guys are much worse than Deshaun Watson. So it'd be another downgrade for this offense if they had to go back to Walker for a period of time. David Njoku and Elijah Moore got a ton of volume with Cooper Kupp, with Amari Cooper missing time, but neither guy had 60 receiving yards. Now, the Broncos defense has been a lot better, but there's not really anybody in this offense right now. That does include Jerome Ford. He did have a very nice 71% snap rate on Sunday. So like that helps. And that's like at least not a total cross off, but like, again, I don't know what the best case scenario for this offense is right now. So hard for me to get super intrigued. They're facing the Cardinals next week, or the Rams next week. That's not a defense I fear by any means, but just not sure if there's enough there to get really drawn in that situation. So instead, let's talk about some more fun stuff. Let's talk about a role update in that exact same game because Russell Wilson is starting to run a bit again, which is fun to see for sure. I kind of saw this it was the Monday night game against the Bills where he was kind of making those like off schedule, old school Russell Wilson plays again, some like weird shovel plays on 3rd and long. He had 11 rush attempts Sunday. Now, 4 of those were kneels, so basically 7, but even 7 is a big number for him, and he hit that number in the first half. So Russ was running a lot when that game was still competitive, and he now has 7+ rush attempts in 3 of the past 4 games, and it's come with some increased passing efficiency. And this makes sense. If you make Russ more of a threat with his legs, his passing will probably be more efficient. Since their bye week, a 3-game sample, Courtland Sutton has a 26% target share. Nobody else is above 16%. Sutton is averaging 2 deep targets per game in that span as well. I typically tend to think that Sutton is oversalaried, but it's definitely a bump up for him. The volume has been getting here recently, and Russ running more would have the potential to make Sutton viable at a higher salary as well. So next week, they get the Texans. That's honestly a pretty fun game. The total in that game went up 1.5 overnight. It's now 46.5. The Texans favored by 3. I would say for Sutton, I'd probably still want him around 68 or so. It's a bad pass defense, but they didn't throw very much still on Sunday. So like the good target share is not the most voluminous role still. So I want 68 for Sutton and he's 69. Okay. That's fair. That's very fair for him. For Russ, given the rush attempts, I do think he's in play for DFS. So if his salary were like 7,000, 6,900 or so, I would be open to it. And he's 74. So that's a bit high for me. I want to see the breakdown of the quarterback slate, but 74 a bit higher than I want it to be. It's an improvement for sure, and I'm actually willing to consider Russ now where I have not been this entire year, but still want a little bit more before I fork over 74, again, depending on what quarterback looks like on that slate. Javonte Williams, sticking with the Broncos, also set a new season high with a 71% snap rate in that game, 18 carries and 6 targets, and that's very good. The bad is that it resulted in just 71 yards, and Williams had 3 of 11 red zone chances. Samaje Perine mixed in the red zone as well, got some passing game work and played pretty well, which is always the issue with Samaje Perine is he tends to play well, which prevents him from getting squeezed out entirely. So it is an upgrade for Williams to play all those snaps, but it's still definitely not a great role. He was $6,400 last week on FanDuel. I think he should probably be up to like 67 or so, given the snap rate. But the red zone role is annoying. The lack of pass or the potential to lose passing game work to Samaje Perine is annoying. So I'll say 67 and he's 66. So that's not bad. I can live with that at least. I think it's about appropriate. The Texans better against the rush than they are against the pass. So it'd funnel more work towards the passing game, but Williams does get that too. So at 66, he's not out of consideration for me. Roll did get better this week. There are some positives. So Broncos' salary is not as bad as I thought they might be for the matchup with the Texans next week. So probably a game we'll be talking about plenty once we get to Thursday's show. Rashee Rice finally got a role expansion for the Chiefs to become basically an every down player. 67% snap rate for Rice, but more importantly, he earned 10 targets in this game. His previous high for a game was 7, and Rice turned that into 170 yards and a touchdown, which should keep that role a bit more steady. So when looking at this Chiefs passing offense, Rice is clearly the guy with the best upside beyond Travis Kelce. And if you can add a floor onto that ceiling, he'd be a really good asset. So I would say Rice, they're not the main slate next week. They're playing Green Bay on Sunday night. I would say Rice is morphing into a low 6,000 salary player versus 57 this week was fine. I used him in like the 4 p.m. slate, but not on the full slate. So low 6,000s-esque player for me right now, which is an improvement from where he was before. And if he keeps on playing like he did in that game, then I would not be shocked if our confidence in Rice grows more and our confidence in the Chiefs offense in general grows as well. That could also translate to Isaiah Pacheco, who set a new high in snap rate once again this week with no Jerick McKinnon. 79% snap rate for Pacheco. His previous high was in the 60s, so up 10 percentage points for Pacheco. 15 carries and 5 targets, and he was out there in more high leverage situations, which was great to see. I think he was out there they had a 3rd and goal from like the 10, which is like the most McKinnon-esque situation possible. Edwards-Helaire like came halfway on the field and then Pacheco like shoved him off. So it was a good role for Pacheco for sure. McKinnon didn't practice Friday. I'm not sure if that was a downgrade for him, like if he re-injured something or what, but not sure what his status is, given they didn't practice on Friday. But if McKinnon does keep missing time, we need to bump up Pacheco at least a half tier, I would say, if not a full one. I had him in nearly every lineup this week, given he was 66 and there was no McKinnon. So that kind of gives you an idea of where I was with his salary, where it was at. He'd be like a mid 7,000 type guy if McKinnon were to miss more time, and I'd be happy to pay that still, given the offense he's in. Dameon Pierce was back, but Devin Singletary still uses a featured back for the Texans. Singletary had just 6 carries, but he added 7 targets and an 81% snap rate and handled 5 out of 8 red zone chances. And those numbers are honestly just as good as what he was doing while Pierce was out. So Pierce was back, but Singletary's role remained basically the same. And Pierce practiced in full the entire week. So it's not like they were easing him back in. He was good to go, and they still leaned on Singletary. So Singletary is not the most talented back, but he is a lead back on a good offense. And they host the Broncos next week again in a very good game where they're a slight home favorites. So when you combine all those things together, I would say an appropriate salary for Singletary right now is probably around $7,100, and he's $7,000. So I didn't expect to be on Singletary once Pierce got back, given that I'm not typically the biggest Singletary guy. But I think given the snap rate, given the offense, given the passing game work, we'll probably want to be there. So Devin Singletary, a really nice usage day on Sunday, and a guy we'll probably be on once again next week. So pretty excited about him based on the usage he saw in that game. We saw the Ravens' first game without Mark Andrews, and Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely both had very good roles to the team. Flowers led with 8 targets. That was his highest since back in week 5. He also had a long rushing touchdown, obviously. He had, that was kind of fluky, but the 8 targets is good. Isaiah Likely, 6 targets for 40 yards. He ran a route on 26 of 34 dropbacks. Rashad Bateman also played a bunch of snaps as Odell Beckham was clearly still banged up during the game. I thought Odell would be the guy who benefited most from Andrews being out, and kind of saw him on the sidelines, 33% snap rate. He said he'd be playing through pain. So it makes sense that the numbers for Beckham were not that great. Now they have a bye week coming up, which means Odell can get healthy. I would love to be on him at some point, and I think that Beckham will still be relevant at some point, but we'll keep this in the back of our minds that Zay Flowers getting good target numbers as we expected. Isaiah Likely in play for DFS when we want to go with this offense, and could potentially be in on Beckham as well, assuming he is fully healthy. In that backfield, Keaton Mitchell continued to rise, but still not the role you want to see just yet. He had 9 carries and 2 targets for 89 yards, which is very good, from an efficiency perspective, but he also had 0 out of 5 red zone chances, losing work there to Justice Hill. Hill had 3 red zone chances. I think the bigger takeaway from Mitchell's ascent is that it pushes Gus Edwards out of the picture, and that's fine by me because I didn't use Gus to begin with. I'm down to buy Mitchell eventually, but I do want some reporting from reporters we trust, like Adam Schefter, some of the good Baltimore beat reporters. If they give us a thing like saying, hey, after the bye, they're going to unleash Mitchell, then I'll buy in. But I want that reporting first, or see a tangible shift in snap rate, because it's been kind of slow played, and, it's not the most fantasy friendly backfield to begin with, given they lose work to Lamar, don't get a lot of targets. So I want either reporting or a shift in role that we see before I buy into Mitchell, but it wasn't another improved output for last night. James Conner's role lost quite a bit of juice this week. The Cardinals were down big the entire game, but played just 39% of the snaps. Both Michael Carter and Amari DeMarcado worked in. Carter still had 5 targets, but just 32 yards. I'm not going to be into Conner until that role improves or until the offense gets better. And again, they did struggle once again. We talked about that a bit on the Wednesday show. They haven't been that efficient even with Kyler being back. That continued in this one. So want that offense to get better before I buy in the backfield. And honestly, if Connor's going to lose work in the passing game, might not get there even if they do get better. We did see Marquise Brown's role get better, though. He had 12 targets Sunday, and 4 of those were downfield. Trey McBride still had 9 targets because they threw so much in that game, and Greg Dortch had 9 as well. They won't always throw this much, and Kyler, again, still has not been efficient, but 4 deep targets for Brown is tough to turn down. They're on the road against Pittsburgh next week, so pretty tough spot for them, facing a very tough offense, playing outdoors on the road, but I do think the volume for Brown and McBride is at least enough to take a look at their salaries. I think I'd still want Brown in like the low 6,000 range, given that it's a tough matchup. So I'd probably say 62 or 61 for him. And Marquise Brown's salary next week is 68. Yikes. That's pretty high given the matchup. And for Trey McBride, I'd probably say still around 61 or so, 63. Well, let's say 62, cut the middle. And he is 67. So Cardinals salaries have gotten to where they should be. That's pretty annoying. No longer values there. And I think when you combine that with the lack of efficiency and the tough matchup, I'm okay taking a pause in the Cardinals offense for DFS, at least for next week. Darius Slayton was surprisingly able to play for the Giants on Sunday, but Jalen Hyatt still had his career best game. He had 4 deep targets and 6 overall targets for 109 yards. Tommy DeVito didn't play great, but he was still fine enough. And they're letting him throw deep now. Hyatt has speed. He has talent. I'm not going to cross off this entire offense anymore, which I've kind of done so far. I think there's enough here to consider Saquon in the right spots. I'd need a really, really good matchup, like at home against Arizona, basically, to like get there. Hyatt is at least somewhat viable as well. They're on bye next week, so maybe Hyatt's role gets a bit better, but honestly, it's been okay for a bit now. But developing more of a rapport with DeVito would be good, stuff like that. But keeping an eye on the Giants, no longer a full cross off, more so a partial cross off. I would also love to cross off the Patriots, but they're at least getting Ramondre Stevenson the ball. He's topped 100 yards in scrimmage in now 3 consecutive games, whereas he hadn't topped 89 in a game before that. Now, they still play in awful games, and that won't change because the quarterback situation there is abysmal. They have no juice on offense, all those things. But Stevenson can be a consideration at the right salary and in the right matchup. And next week, they get the Chargers. That's a good matchup because the Chargers defense is pretty bad. So I really don't want to, but I do feel like it's required to check on Stevenson's salary. I just haven't used anybody in this offense all year, and I'd like to keep doing that. But honestly, given the matchup, given the role getting better, I do feel like I should at least give it a check. So let's say 68 on Stevenson, and he's 73. Thank you, FanDuel, for allowing me to just avoid him. I think 73 is too high. I know it's a good matchup. I know he's been doing better recently, but like I don't know if I could do 73 in that offense. So hopefully I can avoid him next week. I would love to just kind of not deal with it, but it does depend on how the rest of the slate breaks down because he has at least have a good enough role to justify consideration. Jake Browning was not as bad in his first game in place of Joe Burrow as I thought he might be. Average 0.05 passing net expected points per dropback. His completion percentage over expectation was 9.1%, but it was kind of like Tyson Bagent where it was all checkdowns. Only 2 throws for Browning went more than 15 yards downfield. Now, that may change when they're not facing the Steelers' defensive line against a very bad offensive line, but I'm going to keep status quo for now, which means not using Joe Mixon in a non-explosive offense. Viewing Jamar Chase similar to Garrett Wilson when Zach Wilson was starting, where like he's fine if the salary comes down, but I do need it to come down quite a bit to really get intrigued there. They're facing Jacksonville on Monday night, so not in the main slate, but I need that salary to come down. The volume would be good for Chase, but just it's the efficiency that bothers me. In their first game after firing Matt Canada, the Steelers got 400 yards on offense for the first time in, I think it was 58 games, which is absurd. Their approach on offense was not super different, though. There was some, I would say, smarter distribution of the ball for Kenny Pickett, like throwing the ball over the middle a bit more, stuff like that. They were equally rush heavy, though. Najee Harris and Jalen Warren had basically the same roles they had before. The difference, though, is they got Pat Freiermuth more involved. He had 11 targets, which is his high in the season by 7. His previous high was 4. So honestly, I don't want to change how I view them that much. Maybe that does burn me, but they haven't had many upside players, so I'm fine being lower on them than consensus for a bit. Now, the problem is next week they're facing Arizona, which means I kind of got to go there. I'm not going to get to pick it. I can't do that. But like, I could see Freiermuth if his salary were like 53 being in play and he's 58. Yeah, I get it. I'm guessing low on all these this week. So not a good sign for value next week, but 58 is okay for Freiermuth. It's not perfect by any means. I do want to see George Pickens just out of curiosity. Pickens in this game, I want to check the target totals for Pickens because I think he had 8, if I'm remembering correctly, but I could be wrong on that. Pickens had 5. It was Deontay Johnson who had 8. As far as downfield targets go, Deontay had 1, Freiermuth had 3, Pickens had 2. So I would say for Deontay Johnson, I'd probably want him around like 64 or so. And his salary is 68. Again, a little high. Pickens, I'd want around 63 or so. 66. I am low across the board. Maybe this is just salaries getting jacked up because of the matchup, but they're all a little high for me for the Steelers. So good vibes, better vibes at least. Well, the Deontay Johnson vibes are kind of bad, but like it's an overall improvement for them coming off of a game where they actually put up some yardage, but I think that it might be okay to be a bit low on them despite the matchup. Bijan Robinson hit 100 yards in scrimmage for the second consecutive game on Sunday, which is delightful. 16 carries and 6 targets. 2 of his 3 highest carry totals have come in the past 2 games. And he also had 3 out of 5 red zone chances, which does not count his receiving touchdown because that one came from further out. So I think it's cemented the fact that his role is better now than it was earlier on. Got that role bump in week 10, had their bye week, and then had this good game in week 12. They're at the Jets next week. The Jets are a pretty tough spot, but you can run the ball a bit on them. So they're not a cross-off defense by any means. This game is not good. Total for this game is, I believe, 35.5. So, or 34.5. That's not great. But I do still like the role for Bijan quite a bit. So I'd probably say $7,700 for him. He's 81. Man, I am low on everything for next week. So that's not ideal. A little bit concerning. I'm excited to see the salary scroll, see if there are guys we have not discussed who may be hopefully a bit under salary, but I'm coming in low pretty much across the board. It's a good salary for Bijan. I knocked it down because of the matchup against the Jets, but for his role, 8,100 is probably appropriate. It's more to the matchup that in game environment that lowers me on him. I'm not sure if Kenneth Walker III will miss more time, but Zach Charbonnet's role was good without him. He had 14 carries and 4 targets on an 87% snap rate. The yardage was not there, but you also don't really expect that given the matchup with the 49ers. I would happily be on Charbonnet again if Walker were to miss more time. They get the Cowboys on Thursday Night Football. That game is in Dallas, so big underdogs once again, but you can run the ball in Dallas a bit, so I would be very okay with Charbonnet being high on him in single game entries if we get him without Walker again. That role is kind of what you expected in a good way for Charbonnet on Thursday. With Luke Musgrave out, both Jaden Reed and Christian Watson had really nice games. Watson had 7 targets, and 4 of those were deep. Reed tied a season high with 8 targets, and he also had 2 more rushing attempts. Tucker Kraft played 96% of the snaps, but earned just 2 targets in this one. With no Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon played a 52% snap rate despite a positive script. 14 carries, 3 targets, 81 yards. Dillon did have 4 out of 9 red zone chances, which is kind of the only positive in his profile. So I do like Watson and Reed. They both get high leverage looks. I'm less high on Dillon. I think that we're seeing Watson and Reed kind of separate a bit in this passing game, and they might get more looks with Musgrave being on IR. So I bumped them up. Dillon, status quo in a bad way. Charbonnet was status quo in a good way. Bad way for AJ Dillon. Still not earning more work for this team. I don't think they trust him to have like a full workload, and I understand why. So a bit annoying for AJ Dillon in his role once again. Jamison Williams ran a route on 31 of 47 dropbacks to the Lions on Thanksgiving. Earned just 3 targets, but turned that into 51 yards. I would need the salary to be low, but we know that Williams can make pretty big plays. And I think that's enough for us to at least continue considering him in the right spots. Next week, Detroit is taking on New Orleans. So another dome game for them, which is always a positive. Williams is 53 on Thanksgiving. I'd probably want him to stay around there, but like if he were 53, I'd be okay at least giving it some thought, given it is an indoor game. If Marshawn Lattimore can't go again, he wouldn't like shadow Williams by any means, but like, does hurt their secondary overall. So I would say 54 for Jameson Williams next week. He's 52. So probably will be there, if I'm being fully honest, next week. Just because the snaps are there, talent is there, can have yardage upside, can get touchdowns. So wouldn't be shocked if I'm on Jameson Williams for the main slate next week. I'm apparently going to need a lot of salary to save, given what things look like elsewhere. And I think there's enough there to consider him at that number. One small note from Thursday is that George Kittle had 2 deep targets in that game. Kittle now has multiple deep targets in 5 consecutive games. Now, Debo didn't play in 2 of those, but that's tough to get at tight end, and it's even tougher to get from a quarterback who is as efficient on deep throws as Brock Purdy is. I have been resistant to Kittle when they've had both Debo and Ayuk healthy, but I do think this increases the odds that he skewers me for not using him. So I've been resistant of Kittle, given his high salaries and given they've had all the guys healthy, but more open to him now. If he's going to get deep work from a guy playing as well in the deep throws as Purdy is, I probably have to at least consider him. So amending a previous error for Kittle. I'd rather pay up for Kittle than get to McBride at 67 if you want to put in a comparison for a salary you've already seen for next week. Let's take a look at other salaries across week number 13. Pull up the FanDuel player pool for the week 13 main slate. Primary games next week. Miami is facing the Commanders, so very high total there. You can see on the screen if you're watching on FanDuel TV Plus or FanDuel YouTube. Tyreek Hill, $10,000. I get that. We'll get to receiver in a second, see where the rest of the guys settle in, but like that's a fair game. Denver and Houston's a good game, and then we also have San Francisco taking on Philadelphia, which will be a banger of a game in the NFC. Going over to quarterback, no Mahomes on this slate, no Josh Allen, and no Lamar Jackson, which is why Tua Tagovailoa carries his second highest salary at 84. I don't think that's totally off base, given the amount of passing volume we'll see in this game on both sides, given Washington can sometimes be frisky enough to keep things close. I don't hate that for Tua at 84. I think that's fine. Brock Purdy, 78. I know he's had more upside recently. That's a little bit high, given he's never really been this super, super high upside guy. Would have preferred that one to be a little bit lower personally. Honestly, quarterback does not look great. It might just be a slate where you say, okay, Jalen Hurts is 9,000. You go there and figure out the rest, because Hurts will always be a phenomenal play. Maybe Purdy gets bumped up just because of the game environment there. Maybe we go CJ Stroud against Denver, but they've been pretty good recently. I think it might just be a Hurts week again. Make it easy on ourselves. Maybe just go Tua, stuff like that. Make it easy. It might just be a week to spend up at quarterback once again. At running back, Kyren Williams, mentioned before, don't mind his salary, $8,500. I think that's very fair. It's a tough matchup at home against Cleveland. If there's no Myles Garrett, that would improve Williams' outlook a pretty decent amount, but okay with Kyren 85 if we can find the salary to get there. Austin Eckler, 8,000. I think he was 8,000 on the Thursday through Monday slate this week. He was for the super flex slate, at least, which was included Sunday night. So 8,000, I don't know, man. Like, I will probably find a way to get there, but that one is what it is. Jahmyr Gibbs is 77. His role was still pretty good on Sunday. Now, part of that was or on Thursday, I should say. Part of that was because they got down, so they kind of factored David Montgomery out, but Gibbs still had a good role. So 77 for him is not terrible, given the way that game sets up. Rachaad White finally gets a plus matchup. His role is good again on Sunday, over 100 yards from scrimmage again. They're facing Carolina, just fired Frank Reich. Wouldn't be shocked if I'm on Rachaad White again, 75. Now, he's not like the highest upside guy, and paying 75 for that is a bit more daunting than anything else. So it's not low, the salary for Rachaad White, but I think it's appropriate. So him and Gibbs both pretty interesting in the mid 7,000 range at running back. Again, don't mind Singletary, 7,000. Facing Denver could be a good way to get access to that game. DeAndre Swift had a really weird usage game on Sunday where he basically didn't touch the football in the first half. Still had a down game overall, but like I don't think it was as down as the box score would say. The snap rate for Swift was still 63%, 14 carries, only one target, 2 out of 7 red zone chances. No red zone chances for kind of Gainwell, though. So DeAndre Swift at 67 might be a good way to get access to that game without breaking the bank. I don't hate that, and don't hate Javonte Williams again at 66. I think those are the, quote unquote value guys popping here beyond Singletary at 7,000. Scrolling down further at running back, not seeing much down here. So I feel like, again, it'll probably be a week where we save salary running back, getting down to Singletary, getting down to Swift, checking out guys like Javonte Williams potentially as well. I think that might be the route to playing things, given we want to get to Jalen Hurts likely at quarterback next week. Wide receiver. Let's see what we can find here. See if we can find some value beyond just Jameson Williams at $5,200. Scrolling down, Tank Dell's 82, worth it. Totally fine with that, as always. Ayuk is 8,000. I was kind of hoping we might get him a bit lower. Same thing with Devontae Smith at 77 to get access to that game. I think we'll see a lot of passing game work on both sides in that one. So the salaries aren't low for Ayuk and Devontae Smith, but I still wouldn't be entirely shocked if I did wind up getting there, similar to Jalen Waddle at 78. Given, again, I expect that game to be pretty pass heavy, and Waddle looked good in that Friday afternoon game. Deebo Samuel 73 facing Philadelphia once again. Pretty okay with that. Do you want to dig in more to like what they've looked like when they've had all their guys healthy? But Deebo had a good game on Thursday, so 73 is not a terrible number for him. Scrolling down further at receiver, Cortland Sutton is fine at 69. Not amazing, but fine. Now let's try to find some value here. Getting down to the low 6,000 range, not seeing much that stands out down here, at least as of right now. And we're into the 5,000 range now and still not seeing much there either. Oh boy, it might be a tough week for value, which means maybe we are talking Jalen Guyton at 53, taking on New England if there's no Josh Palmer yet, if there's no Quentin Johnston, stuff like that. Maybe we're kind of forced into Guyton at 53 or forced into Jameson Williams at 52. Those guys might wind up being necessities for us next week. Don't see a whole lot. Oh, if Josh Palmer is activated, he's $5,000. Haven't seen a lot on him. I think, again, the benefit here is we do get to see practice reports, like whether guys are full in practice, limited, et cetera, et cetera. But Josh Palmer, if he gets in a full practice on Thursday or Friday, $5,000 for him, that could be a key value at wide receiver. So it might wind up being a kind of stars and scrubs type. Ooh, Marvin Mims is $4,800. Let me check to see what his snap rate was this past week. It's been pretty good overall recently. He's been getting some like gadgety type plays, like some rush attempts, which we will take. Playing indoors, pretty good game. This past week, Marvin Mims, 3 targets for Marvin Mims. They didn't throw a whole lot, so it's not terrible. Deep targets for Mims, 1 there, 1 last week. Let's check the snaps on Marvin Mims for this week. Again, $4,800 for him, which is why this is at least worth bringing up. All right. Snap rate for Marvin Mims this week was 47%. Maybe that's because it was a rush-heavy script. Let me see the routes, because they didn't run a ton of pass plays. 11 routes from Marvin Mims. Adam Troutman ran more. Javonte Williams ran more. Okay, well, talked myself out of that one real fast, so probably not getting to Marvin Mims. But hopefully Josh Palmer can come off IR. I'd be okay with him. Fine with Jameson Williams at 52. Maybe wind up being more than fine by default there, and maybe Jalen Guyton at 53. We might need to be in the value range of receiver once again this week, similar to what we were this past week. Tight end, George Kittle, 74. Again, I think that's fair. Given the deep targets, given the efficiency on the deep targets from Brock Purdy, I understand why his salary is there. Freiermuth 58 looks a bit better now than it did before, just because like they bumped up salaries on guys like McBride and stuff like that. So maybe I am on Freiermuth at 58. He played well in that game. He's facing Arizona. Maybe it does just make sense to get to Freiermuth in that spot. Scrolling down at tight ends, not seeing much. Logan Thomas didn't do a whole lot for us on the Thursday slate. Only 4 targets there, despite the fact they threw like 97 times. That's not great. Kate Otten is $5,100. We'll probably just rather get to Freiermuth there. Let's see the numbers on Otten from this week. 5 targets. It's not terrible. 14% target share overall. Has had some deep targets recently, so I guess that's something, but I think the better value is in Freiermuth at 58. I prefer Logan Thomas as well, 52, over Kate Otten at 51. Juwan Johnson, 49. If we have no Olave and no Shaheed in this game, they got to throw the ball somewhere, and Johnson at least is athletic, so maybe it winds up being a Juwan Johnson week for a spend down option. And then I don't see a whole lot elsewhere at tight end in the lower ranges. So, yeah, higher on Freiermuth than I thought I was at 58, just because we need to say salary. He does that for us and played well in an expanded role this past week. So maybe that's our route to getting exposure to the Steelers off the Matt Canada firing. I think that we'll see a lot of people go towards Freiermuth in that one, but potentially justified given the way things set up there. That's all that we have for today here on the Heat Check. We're back with you once again Thursday to give a full preview of the Week 13 main slate, trying to find some value, hopefully, by that point to make our lineups work over on FanDuel. If you got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can also find me on FanDuel Research, or you can find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis. You can find FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Again, Daily ISO is right here in the same podcast feed, the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, also on FanDuel TV Plus. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or over on Spotify, or leave a thumbs up over on the FanDuel YouTube page as well. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your Monday single game slates, and we'll talk to you once again Thursday to get you ready for Week 13. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.